Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be delving into the fascinating case of the Flatwoods monster of Braxton County, West Virginia. The incident we'll be discussing occurred on September 12th, 1952, following a reported UFO sighting. If you had the chance to catch my previous video on the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, you might remember that during my discussion on the prevailing thoughts and attitudes surrounding UFO phenomenon in the 1950s, I made a specific point to mention the Flatwoods monster case. The reason behind that is that, apart from the shootout element, these cases exhibit several similarities. In all honesty, after that video and me writing this outline, it occurred to me that I should have covered this case before the Kelly incident. But unfortunately, like I said, that thought didn't occur to me until after I had finished that video. With that, we're going to cover this today because this story still deserves its own deep dive. Now, if you haven't checked out the Kelly Hopkinsville video, I would highly recommend you give it a watch actually before this one, even though I said this one takes place beforehand, and I should have covered this one first. But I go into a little bit more detail about like the thoughts and feelings of the UFO phenomenon in the early 50s, because in this video I'm going to keep it kind of short since I discussed it in that one. But with that being said, let's quickly go over those thoughts and what was happening in the mid-1950s with the idea of UFOs. So, in June of 1947, private pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 unidentified flying objects over Mount Rainier in Washington state. His sighting would go on to popularize the term flying saucer when news media kind of just interpreted his description the wrong way and started referring to them as flying saucers. Now, his sighting would lead to the United States' initial fascination with the UFO phenomenon, and after Kenneth's sightings, many additional sightings were reported throughout the remainder of 1947. In fact, one of those additional sightings was the now famous Roswell crash in New Mexico. But not only were the US citizens fascinated with these UFOs, but so was the US government. Now, the US government created Project Sign in 1947, Project Grudge in 1948, and then ultimately Project Blue Book in 1952, which was the US Air Force making a concerted effort to understand the true nature of this phenomenon and, more importantly to the government, determine if this was a matter of national security. But to keep it short, I'm going to leave those sentiments there. But as I said earlier, if you want more context, go check out the Kelly Hopkinsville video where I go into much further detail. But with all that, let's get into this story. Also, real quick, if you enjoy this video and any of my previous videos, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It'll really help me out and tells me that you all are enjoying the videos. Now, let's step back over 70 years in the past and discuss the Flatwoods monster of Braxton County, West Virginia. So, as mentioned in the introduction, this encounter occurred on September 12, 1952. It started innocently on a Friday evening after school had ended for the weekend, and a few local boys from the Flatwoods area, those being Edward May, who was 13 at the time, his brother Freddie May, who was 11 at the time, Neil Nunley, who was 14, and Tommy Heyer, who was 10, decided to play on the front lawn of the Flatwoods Elementary School. Now, around 7:15 p.m., the group was startled by a loud noise, which was immediately followed by the appearance of a peculiar-shaped object that was emitting a bright light, so bright that, according to this group, it almost appeared as if the object was on fire. The group reported that the object soon began descending rapidly, and due to its fiery appearance, they believed it was going to crash into the ground, specifically on a hill belonging to a local farmer named G. Bailey Fisher. However, right before the crash landing, the object came to a complete stop and began slowly descending, appearing as if it was going to land on the hill. During this landing sequence of sorts, the boys lost sight of the object as it disappeared behind another hill, but they all reported that they saw an eerie light pulsating on that hill. Uncertain of what they had just witnessed, the group agreed that whatever it was, it had to be more interesting than playing on the front lawn of the school, so they decided to investigate the sighting, especially to ensure no one was injured if it did turn out to be a plane crash, because when they saw this object, they thought it was either a plane crash or a meteor. Now, Edward and Freddie May's mother's house was on the route the boys would have to take to reach Fisher's property, so they decided to stop in to tell their mother what they had seen. Their mother, who was named Mrs. Kathleen May, was a 32-year-old beautician and former elementary school teacher. Now, when the boys shared their sighting with her, she didn't consider the possibility of a UFO. Instead, she thought it sounded like a plane crash or perhaps the impact of a meteorite, just like the boys. So Kathleen was concerned about possible injuries if it was a plane crash, but also intrigued by the idea of it being a meteorite. At this point, Kathleen made the decision to join the boys on their journey, and she also contacted 17-year-old Eugene Lemon to accompany them. Now, exactly how Kathleen knew Eugene varies in different sources, but what's important is that Eugene was a member of the West Virginia National Guard, and he also agreed to join the group. The May family's dog, named Richie, was also part of this search group, and another local boy named Ronnie Shaver, whose age was unknown, tagged along as well. So, once the group was formed, Kathleen gave Eugene a flashlight and they started making their way towards the suspected landing site of the object. This site was approximately a quarter mile away from the May's residence, and as they arrived at a hill that marked the entrance to Mr. Fisher's farm, they climbed over the fence and began ascending the hill. Suddenly, Richie, who was the May family's dog, abruptly turned and ran back towards their home with his tail tucked between his legs. Although all the members took notice of this strange behavior for the dog, they didn't think much of it and proceeded with their climb up the hill. The group quickly reached the summit of the hill, only to discover that the light that they had seen earlier had moved further down the hill from their initial estimation. Moreover, the light had intensified and was now pulsating hues of red and orange. Now, obviously, this intrigued the group, and they wanted to approach the object to get a closer look. As they got within approximately 50 feet of the object, they were met with a rather unusual sight. What they claimed to have seen was a sphere-like object approximately 5 feet tall and 25 feet in diameter, which the witnesses described as a, quote, ball of fire. As they observed the object closely, they noticed a thick layer of mist and fog began filling the woods. Now, this already eerie scene was then accompanied by a foul sulfur smell and a burning metal odor, which caused discomfort to every member's senses. All the witnesses said that this smell was so strong that it irritated their eyes and burned their nostrils. At this time, both Kathleen and Eugene, who were the only adults in this group, realized that they were in a situation beyond their expectations, and they felt it might be best for the group to leave the area. Just as the rest of the group started sensing the same uneasiness, they began hearing rustling sounds coming from the surrounding woods. The group seemed rather uncertain about what the source of the noise was, but one of the boys, it's unclear which of the boys it was, but one of them reported that they saw two large reddish-orange eyes staring directly at them high up in one of the trees. Now, most of the group assumed that it was just some sort of wildlife quietly observing them, but the group decided to play it safe and check the source of the glowing eyes. So Eugene aimed his flashlight towards the eyes, but to their shock and horror, what they witnessed was unlike any form of wildlife they had ever encountered before. Instead, what they saw was a towering 10-foot tall creature with burning orange-green eyes housed within a large head with a blood-red face. The creature's large head featured those burning orange-green eyes encased within a hood-like structure that came to a spade-like point. And as I said, it had a blood-red face, and the body of the creature, which was either a dark green or pitch black color, seemed to exhibit both cloth-like folds and a metallic texture. The lower portion of the body appeared dressed like in a dress almost, really. It looks like a skirt almost, but a metallic skirt. And it had long and slender arms, which led to small claw-like hands. Now, when Eugene hit this creature with the flashlight light, it almost appeared to startle both the group and the creature itself. As reported by the group, the creature emitted a high-pitched sound resembling either a screech or a hiss. According to them, it then proceeded to move closer to the group, but the group noticed that the creature appeared to lack visible legs and seemed to be floating or hovering above the ground. Now, at that point, the entire group was overcome with terror due to what they were witnessing, and they all unanimously agreed that they had seen enough. However, in a state of utter fear, Eugene unintentionally dropped the flashlight, and the entire group retreated down the hill from the direction they had entered. When they reached the fence they had crossed earlier, the group was in such a hysterical state that they all promptly either jumped over the fence or climbed through it. After that, the entire group quickly sprinted the quarter mile back to Kathleen's home. Upon their arrival at the house, the group noticed that Richie, who, if you remember, was the family dog, was hiding underneath the house and refused to come out. Now, the group did take this into concern, but they were much more worried about their own well-being. So Eugene and Kathleen managed to regain some composure and contacted the Braxton County Police Department to request the aid of Sheriff Robert Carr at their location. Interestingly, when they initially made the call, Sheriff Carr was absent as he had been summoned to the town of Gasaway, which was approximately 11 miles south of Flatwoods, in response to another incident where a burning plane like object had seemingly crashed into the mountainside. The outcome of that particular incident remains uncertain, but Sheriff Carr would eventually arrive at the Mays home about an hour after that initial call. Upon Sheriff Carr's arrival at the Mays home, he was accompanied by Deputy Burnell Long. But to their surprise, they discovered that they were not the only investigators present that night. One Mr. A. Lee Stewart, who was a co editor of the Braxton Democrat, had arrived at the scene around the same time. The exact means by which Mr. Stewart became aware of the event remains unclear, but it appears that Kathleen may have reached out to him in order to share the description of what they had just witnessed and have someone listen to their account. Regardless of the specific reason for Mr. Stewart's presence, he proceeded to conduct interviews with almost all the members of the group. Remarkably, they all provided consistent descriptions regarding the encounter and the creature they had encountered. The two officers, along with Mr. Stewart, observed peculiar behavior among the group members. Almost all the members of the group reported experiencing difficulty breathing, intense throat irritation, eye strain, soreness, as well as severe symptoms of nausea and vomiting. With that gathered information, the officers and Mr. Stewart reached the decision that the next course of action was to investigate the reported landing site and search for the alleged monster. However, both parties felt hesitant about venturing into that area because it was late, which made it too dark for a comprehensive investigation, and there was the lingering concern about encountering this gigantic creatures if the witnesses were indeed telling the truth. I said creatures there, I just meant creature. Eugene actually decided that he would lead the group back to where the encounter took place, although he agreed to this hesitantly given that he was still shaken up by the initial encounter, but he too was feeling the adverse effects mentioned earlier. Now armed with weapons, the officers, Mr. Stewart and Eugene, proceeded to the fence where the previous group had entered and climbed the hill. But, to Eugene's astonishment, they found nothing. The unidentified craft, the ball of fire, and the creature were all gone. Even the mist and foul smell had vanished. The only remnants of any evidence were track marks in the muddy ground and a peculiar pool of oil-like substance. Recognizing that it was too late to proceed with the investigation, the group decided to conclude their efforts for that night. Upon their return to the house, the officers assured everyone that they would resume the investigation in the morning, and despite the lingering effects and emotional distress from the encounter, all members of the group knew that there was nothing further they could do until morning. With the exception of Kathleen, Edward, and Freddie May, the remaining members departed from the Mays home and returned to their own residences for the night. Now, the next morning, Sheriff Carr arrived at the Mays family home, accompanied by several members of the West Virginia State Police, to conduct a more extensive investigation. Due to Flatwoods being a small town with a population of no more than 300 at the time of the encounter, word of the incident quickly spread within the community. In fact, the news had already started circulating soon after Sheriff Carr's arrival at the home the previous night. That meant that on the morning of September 13th, 1952, not only were there several officers conducting investigations, but also members of the Flatwoods community eager to catch a glimpse of the alleged UFO and its extraterrestrial pilot. To their credit, the officers did a pretty excellent job of managing the scene that morning, despite this large crowd of people attempting to investigate the site on their own. However, during this investigations, the officers were still unable to find any evidence that matched the descriptions provided by the group that previous night. The only notable discovery was a small area of depressed grass, approximately 5 or 6 feet long, with two deep skid marks on its edges. Although this was the only area with such characteristics, that skid mark extended about 30 feet down the hill before disappearing. Furthermore, the peculiar oil-like substance that had been observed during the previous night's investigation was still present at the scene. However, it seems that the officers did not consider that mysterious liquid significant to the investigation, and no sample was collected for further analysis. That meant the investigation concluded rather swiftly due to the lack of substantial evidence. However, the individuals involved in the incident were still left deeply shaken fearful, and downright confused. It was evident to both the authorities and the local community in Flatwoods that these individuals had experienced something truly unsettling. Their expressions showed their true fear, and they continued to suffer from the physical and emotional effects of the encounter. Eugene, in particular, bore the brunt of the ordeal, frequently losing consciousness since that fateful night. But what's pretty interesting is that the next night, this would be the same night as the morning investigation, so September 13th, about 19 miles southwest of Flatwoods in Frametown, West Virginia, a couple was enjoying a leisurely drive with their 18-month-old child. Unexpectedly, their vehicle started sputtering, and within moments, it completely stalled. The husband maneuvered the car to the side of the road before it came to a complete halt, and after attempting to restart the vehicle without any success, the couple decided to wait a few minutes before trying again. During this waiting time, they noticed a strong and noxious smell of sulfur permeating the car, which caused the 18-month-old child to start to cry. The odor was described as so repugnant that it burned all of the members' nostrils and made their breathing difficult. To make it even more terrifying, this incident occurred around 8 p.m., well after sunset, in a remote area of Frametown with no streetlights present. With no daylight, no headlights, and no streetlights, this family was stranded in pitch darkness and were unable to see the true terror lurking right in front of their car. After their eyes adjusted to the darkness, the couple was startled to see a towering figure, which they said stood about 9 feet tall, and was leaning over the hood of their car. They said the creature was in such close proximity that one of its hands was actually resting on the car's hood, seemingly looking as if this creature was inspecting the trapped family inside. Now, what's interesting is the silhouette of this creature closely resembled the Flatwoods monster, except for its torso and head. It had that same pleated metallic skirt-like body described in the Flatwoods encounter and was of similar height. However, unlike that encounter, the creature appeared to be a reptilian-like humanoid, as it lacked the upper portion of what could be interpreted as a possible spacesuit. After a brief moment, the creature lost interest in the family and turned toward the woods adjacent to the road, which it then slowly hovered into the darkness of those woods. Astonishingly, once the creature departed, the family's car started up without any issues whatsoever. Obviously terrified, the couple wasted no time and swiftly drove towards Sutton, West Virginia, which was approximately 14 miles northeast of Frametown. Upon reaching Sutton, they decided to secure their safety for the night by booking a room in a local hotel. The next morning, as they were preparing to head back home, they made a startling discovery. On the hood of their vehicle, they noticed a peculiar V-shaped burn mark where they believed the creature had touched the vehicle. Although this sighting took place on September 13th, 1952, just the day after the original sighting, the family chose not to report this encounter until almost 3 years later in 1955, when the husband finally decided to share his story. The account was then published in a magazine article, and interestingly, despite the striking similarities between the two creatures, there are some who question whether the so-called Flatwoods monster and the half-reptilian creature known as the Frametown monster are actually the same creature. However, it is worth noting that the prevailing belief among many is that these two creatures are actually the same creature. As mentioned in both this video and my video on the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, the 1950s was an important time in the history of ufology. The American people were both in awe and terrified by these crafts and creatures. Thanks to stories like the Roswell crash, it's these type of stories that really put the idea of extraterrestrial life in the consciousness of the American people. With that said, it should be no surprise that the Flatwoods encounter was a big deal once it spread beyond the small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia. Within just a few days after the encounter, the story spread throughout the United States like wildfire. Mrs. Kathleen May reported receiving multiple calls from authors, radio hosts, TV hosts, and UFO enthusiasts, all eager to get their own scoop on the story. Additionally, in the days following the encounter, the northeastern portion of the United States experienced a huge surge in reported UFO sightings. So, given the United States' obsession with UFOs and the rapid spread of the story, Kathleen May and Eugene Lemon were given the opportunity to appear on an NBC talk show titled We the People to share their experience with the world. The two accepted the offer and were scheduled to appear on the show on September 19th, 1952, which was just a week after their encounter. However, a few hours before their appearance, Kathleen and Eugene were provided with a sketch artist. They described the creature, and the artist produced what has now become the most famous depiction of the Flatwoods Monster. Kathleen and Eugene would later state that while the drawing is a little sensationalized, it is fairly accurate for the most part. Similar to many UFO and paranormal events, it didn't take long for paranormal researchers to arrive in Flatwoods. One notable figure was Ivan T. Sanderson, who was a biologist and author who was among the earliest proponents of what is now known as cryptozoology. Upon arriving, Sanderson conducted the interviews with all the witnesses and examined the reported landing site. However, he was not alone in this investigation, because Gray Barker, who was a West Virginia native and paranormal research, agreed to collaborate with Sanderson in an effort to uncover the truth about what had occurred on the night of September 12, 1952. Unfortunately, their investigation didn't yield much more than the initial investigation. As mentioned, by the time these investigators arrived, the Flatwoods encounter had become national news. Many of the indirect witnesses, meaning those who were not directly involved in the encounter, would alter their accounts of the sighting of what they believed to be the same object that had landed in Flatwoods that night. After numerous articles, news stories, and radio and TV episodes focused on the Flatwoods Monster, the Braxton County Police reached a conclusion where they attributed the witnesses' experiences to mass hysteria. They were confident, however, in stating that Mrs. May, Eugene, and the rest of the group were not perpetrating a hoax, as they had genuine fear and distress, and that was very, very evident. Instead, the explanation offered was that heightened stress caused by a possible meteor crash, combined with the nighttime settling, led the group to misidentify their encounter as a sighting of a 10-foot tall mechanical extraterrestrial. Also, it is worth mentioning that there was a file in Project Blue Book that addressed the Flatwoods account. But their conclusion aligned with that of the Braxton County Police, where they suggested a similar explanation for the incident. Nearly 4 years would pass before any further mention of the Flatwoods Monster, where in 1956, two of Gray Barker's works featured key references and discussions about the encounter. However, just as quickly as it had appeared, the Flatwoods Monster would vanish from public attention and wouldn't resurface in Braxton County, West Virginia, until nearly 50 years later. Now, while it took almost 50 years for Braxton County to revisit their monster, the Flatwoods Monster actually did not completely vanish from the media. Just like the Hopkinsville Goblins, the Japanese media showed a keen interest in the Flatwoods Monster. So in 1988, an NES game titled Amagon featured the Flatwoods Monster as the game's final boss. Also, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which was released in 2000 for the Nintendo 64, included ghost-like alien creatures known simply as them, which bore striking resemblance to the Flatwoods Monster. And continuing with the Nintendo-related references, the 2013 game The Wonderful 101 includes an enemy character named Gimme that bears a resemblance to the Flatwoods Monster. Furthermore, the game Tamagotchi Life, also released in 2013, features decorative statues of both the Flatwoods Monster and the Mothman. However, the Flatwoods Monster would start to find popularity in the States again around the late 2010s. In 2018, the Bethesda video game Fallout 76, which takes place in a nuclear wasteland version of West Virginia, features the Flatwoods Monster and Mothman as enemy characters. Additionally, in 2018, an indie production company named Small Town Monsters produced a documentary on the monster and encounter. In 2019, History Channel premiered a show called Project Blue Book, which featured dramatized versions of cases contained within the real-life Blue Book. The second episode of the show was titled The Flatwoods Monster and was centered around the monster, the encounter, and the investigation of the case. But now let's rewind back to the year 2002 in Braxton County, West Virginia. This particular year marked the 50th anniversary of the Flatwoods incident, and the residents of Braxton County decided to commemorate this peculiar event. Thus, the Flatwoods Monster Festival was established. Like many paranormal gatherings, the festival served as a community event, allowing locals to come together and celebrate the unique history of their town. Over time, the Flatwoods Monster Festival grew in popularity and garnered continued interest from both Braxton County locals and visitors. Recognizing the enduring fascination with the Flatwoods Monster, the town of Sutton, which was located approximately 6 miles south of Flatwoods, decided to capitalize on this interest. In 2018, they opened the Flatwoods Monster Museum, which was a dedicated space where enthusiasts and curious individuals can delve into the history, legends, and cultural impact of the Flatwoods Monster. Additionally, 5 chairs, which measure about 10 feet tall and 4 feet wide, have been specifically designed and painted to resemble the iconic Flatwoods Monster. These chairs are all positioned around different locations of Braxton County to serve as eye-catching landmarks for both locals and visitors to enjoy. The town of Flatwoods proudly embraces this story of the monster, as evidenced by a welcoming sign that greets visitors with the words, "Welcome to Flatwoods, home of the Green Monster." Now, I want to say it is interesting to note that this creature is known by various names, including the Flatwoods Monster, the Frametown Monster, the Green Monster, the Flatwoods Phantom, and the more recent endearing nickname of Braxy. As with many events, the Flatwoods Monster Festival was unfortunately impacted by the pandemic and had to be canceled for the these last 3 consecutive years, sorry. However, there is good news as the festival is scheduled to make a comeback in September of this year, 2023. Now, the town of Sutton offers a unique attraction by hosting not just one, but 2 museums that are dedicated to cryptids. Alongside the Flatwoods Monster Museum, which celebrates that famous encounter, Sutton added another dimension in its cryptozoology celebration in June of 2021 with the opening of the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum. Bigfoot Museum was unveiled during the first annual Bigfoot Festival in Sutton, which drew an impressive crowd of nearly 1,500 people. The Flatwoods Monster Museum and Sutton Bigfoot Museum, which are situated less than 400 feet apart, hold a unique connection and receive equal admiration during the highly anticipated Bigfoot Festival. Today, I wanted to discuss this topic to highlight the upcoming 2023 West Virginia Bigfoot Festival, which is scheduled for June 25th. Now, I want to say this is not an advertisement, but I must say that if you have the opportunity and means to attend this event, I highly recommend it. I actually attended this festival last year, and I can confidently attest to its impressive nature and the wonderful experience it offers, particularly for the fans of cryptozoology and the paranormal. But with all that, let's talk about the original 7 witnesses. When I began this outline, all the members of the group, besides the 2 brothers Freddie and Edward May, had unfortunately passed away. Sadly, however, in the process of making this outline, Freddie May tragically passed away on June 5th, 2023, at 82 years old. That leaves Edward May as the sole survivor of the original encounter. Edward and his late brother Freddie have chosen not to speak about the encounter for many years. They have expressed their reluctance to relive the events and the associated trauma. Additionally, they grew tired of facing constant questions and criticism from both believers and non-believers. As I mentioned at the beginning and throughout this video, the Flatwoods Monster case and the Hopkinsville Goblin case share a surprising number of similarities. One of these similarities happens to be the explanation provided by skeptics regarding the supposed craft and creatures involved in both encounters. Now, like I said earlier, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch that video, the explanation provided for the alleged UFO in the group of supposed alien invaders was attributed to a case of misidentification. Specifically, a theory was poised that the UFO in question was a meteor, while those alleged goblins were attributed to a pair of active great horned owls. Now, these natural phenomena are also associated with the Flatwoods encounter. If you did watch that previous video on the Hopkinsville encounter, you'll know that I wasn't entirely convinced by these explanations, as they didn't seem to provide a conclusive resolution to the case. However, I must admit that I couldn't find enough evidence to support the paranormal nature of the encounter either. Therefore, my conclusion for that case was a rather inconclusive one, leaving me without a definitive answer. Frustratingly, my conclusion for this video will be quite similar to my conclusion on that video. However, it is important to note that in the case of the Flatwoods encounter, there is a bit more room to explore natural explanations compared to the Goblin encounter. To evaluate these explanations, I will use the pro and con system I used in that video, so let's delve into it. As we did in that video, let's start with the meteor explanation first and its pros. Now, again, if you didn't watch that video, sorry for mentioning it so much, but I cannot stress how much these are so similar. But the pros for these are going to be in support of the natural phenomenon. So the pro here for the meteor is going to be what could possibly point to this being a meteor, and then obviously the cons will be it not being a meteor. So for the pros, at the time of the boys' original sighting, there was confirmation of a meteor shower taking place in that area of West Virginia, which was also observed in Pennsylvania and Maryland. If this sighting was indeed caused by a meteorite, it could potentially explain the description of a ball of fire given by all the witnesses, as a meteorite would typically burn up upon entering the Earth's atmosphere. Furthermore, it is worth noting that the witnesses described the ball of fire as pulsating with light. This pulsating effect could potentially be attributed to the meteorite burning up in the atmosphere. But additionally, in 1952, there were 3 aircraft beacons located in Flatwoods. These beacons were sort of used as early navigation tools for early aviation and could emit a glowing light in various colors, which include white, green, or red. So it is possible that the witnesses' perception of the pulsating light could have been influenced by the presence of these beacons. According to some scientific research, it has been observed that some meteorites that have impacted Earth's surface can emit a strong sulfur smell. This phenomenon is attributed to the presence of sulfur compounds within certain types of meteorites. However, it is important to note that not all meteorites exhibit this characteristic smell. And just like the Hopkinsville encounter, the Flatwoods encounter occurred during the early stages of the UFO phenomenon and the widespread interest in panic surrounding unidentified flying objects in America. Also, it is worth noting that a local Flatwoods man later admitted to driving up on the hill of the supposed encounter location. That could possibly explain those deep track marks on the hill and the compressed grass, sorry. So now let's talk about the cons of this being a meteor. So first of all, one thing that has been bothering me since I started this outline is the absence of an impact zone or any fragments of the supposed meteorite. However, upon my further research, it was revealed to me that smaller meteorites, in addition to burning up in the atmosphere, can actually almost completely disintegrate upon impact. But this fact does still not explain the absence of an impact zone. And it's interesting to note that both the Braxton County Police and the Blue Book investigation failed to find any evidence of an impact zone or collect any fragments from the site. That raises the question of what exactly was this ball of fire that all 7 witnesses claimed to have seen. This question sets this encounter apart from the Hopkinsville case because there was only one witness to that alleged UFO, but in this case, these 4 younger boys initially saw this flying object overhead, and then later all 7 witnesses, including those original 4, claimed to have seen the same object on the hill. Additionally, not only were the early 1950s the early stages of the UFO craze, but it was also a time of general interest in space and what lay beyond our planet. If you recall, none of these witnesses jumped to the conclusion that this could be a UFO. Kathleen May, in particular, was ecstatic and believed it could be a meteorite. She was actually familiar with what meteors looked like since space was the hot topic of the time. So, if what they had seen was nothing more than a meteorite, why was every one of them adamant on the fact that what they had seen was undeniably not a meteorite? And of course, this object being a meteorite wouldn't explain the 10-foot tall creature they were about to encounter. But with that, let's delve into the popular explanation of the Flatwoods monster. As mentioned earlier, this creature often falls victim to the common skeptic explanation of owls. Now, before you ask, yes, I'm going to rant about owls again, but I must admit owls, particularly the barn owl, do present a pretty strong plausible case for misidentification. So, as before, let's get into the pros and cons. Pros, obviously, for owl, cons against it. Contrary to the great horned owl in the Hopkinsville case, the barn owl is the suspected culprit in the Flatwoods encounter. And like many owl species, the barn owl is primarily active at night, making it more likely to be encountered during nighttime settings. Considering the fear and panic experienced by the group, it is possible that their eyes deceived them in the darkness, leading them to perceive the creature as something alien in nature. The barn owl does actually exhibit some physical features that bear resemblance to the top half description of the monster. One notable characteristic is its peculiar peculiar shaped facial disc which resembles an upside down heart or kind of a spade shape. The barn owl also possesses large, dark colored eyes that appear nearly black, but can reflect red when exposed to a light source such as a flashlight. Additionally, like many owl species, the barn owl has a powerful set of talons that, under certain circumstances, could possibly be mistaken for menacing claws, potentially contributing to the monster like appearance. Now, regarding the native range of the barn owl, it is worth noting that Flatwoods and the entirety of West Virginia fall within the natural habitat range of these owls. If we recall the climax of the original encounter, the witnesses described the monster emitting a high pitched screech and approaching them silently. These aspects could potentially align with the behavior of an owl. The barn owl, like many other species, has evolved to be a highly skilled hunter and possesses the ability of silent flight when in pursuit of prey. Now, regarding the high pitched sound, it is worth noting that the barn owl has a distinct and somewhat eerie and terrifying call that can be perceived as just that, terrifying, if one is unfamiliar with it. If the witnesses had never encountered this particular owl species before, it would be pretty understandable why they were so frightened by this sound. Okay, time to get into the cons. And once again, yes, I'm going to rant about owls, but probably not as much as I did in the Kelly video. But the first issue I have with the owl theory for this case is the specific owl species attributed to the encounter, which of course is the barn owl. As mentioned earlier, the Flatwoods monster was described as a towering creature that stood about 10 feet tall. That description immediately presents a challenge to this theory because the barn owl is a relatively small species. Typically, these owls stand around 12 to 16 inches tall, which, for comparison, is not much larger than a common crow. Skeptics like Joe Nickel, who I must admit himself is a real stick in the mud when it comes to paranormal investigation, proposes a hypothesis that the group may have misidentified a barn owl perched in a tree above either a smaller tree or large bush, and in a state of fear and panic, they may have mistaken these elements for the creature's pleated metallic green skirt. If this were the case, it would be a rather significant transformation for all 7 witnesses to go from perceiving a barn owl, which is less than a foot and a half tall, to describing a 10-foot tall mechanical extraterrestrial with red, green, and silver features. To that point, the colors and textures described on this creature also give some hesitancy to this theory. For those who are unaware, the barn owl has a very pale coloration with accents of a gray and brown. But just for a second, if we entertain this owl theory, let's hypothesize that this owl has its body facing directly towards the group. This would immediately throw a wrench into this explanation because the barn owl, especially at night, can appear nearly all white when facing straight ahead. Now, this could possibly provide some clarity to the more silverish aspects of the monster, but silver was one of the least described colors of the creature. What this doesn't explain is the blood red face or the black or dark green body of this creature. Additionally, it doesn't explain the metallic like texture described by all the witnesses. Even if this owl was what this group had seen, how could they misidentify backdrop foliage as a metallic skirt with clothing like folds? As for the red face, the skeptic's explanation for this was those airway beacons we talked about earlier. However, while the witnesses described this creature as illuminated by a light other than the flashlight, they never outright described a pulsing illumination that would be produced by one of these airway beacons. Lastly, I want to talk about the typical behavior of a barn owl. And similar to most owls, the barn owl is a very skittish and flighty bird and would most likely rather flee from a perceived threat than attempt to fight it. There is an exception to this rule, which is when the owl is nesting. Now, I apologize now for the endless referencing of my previous video, but if you watched my Kelly Hopkinsville video, you'll know how much the timing of that encounter worked against the owl explanation. This case, honestly, is not much different because the typical nesting season for these owls is anywhere from March to early June, and on average it takes a chick 85 days or 2.8 months to leave the nest. I want to reiterate that this is the typical nesting time frame for barn owls, is that March to early June time frame, But it's important to note that there can be variations, and these events can occur earlier or later than the average. I realized also after the fact I didn't make that point clear enough in the Kelly video where I discussed the possibilities of those creatures being owls. But while it is not impossible, it does seem rather implausible. The same sentiment can be applied to the Flatwoods encounter. However, it must be noted that the September setting of this encounter makes it even more implausible for the creature to be an owl, although still it cannot be completely ruled out. So, with now both the supposed creature and craft covered, the last aspect to consider is the physical symptoms experienced by the witnesses after the encounter. All 7 witnesses described symptoms such as difficulty breathing, eye pain, soreness, throat irritation, nausea, and vomiting. Skeptics often attribute these symptoms to mass hysteria and intense fear experienced by the group. However, if we're going to consider both sides of the explanation, these symptoms are also common in cases of exposure to mustard gas, which believers in this story use to explain the physical illnesses. One aspect that neither of these explanations can account for is the smell described by the witnesses. All of them, if you remember, reported a sulfur like smell and the smell of burnt metal. And on the skeptic sides, they suggest that some grass can emit a minor sulfur like smell if the soil is lacking in aeration and the roots are rotting. However, this explanation falls short in addressing the strong and overwhelming stench described by the group, as well as the presence of the burnt metal smell. On the believer side, the explanation of mustard gas doesn't align well either. Mustard gas, which is also known as sulfur mustard, is named after sulfur as it is one of its elemental components. However, despite that name, mustard gas does not have the specific smell of sulfur. Instead, it typically does smell like mustard or may have little to no smell at all. Furthermore, in its gaseous form, mustard gas has a yellowish or brown color, which does not match the descriptions given by the witnesses. Regarding that burnt metal smell, believers often attribute it to the supposed crash of the craft. They speculate that this scent could have resulted from the craft's propulsion system or other metallic components being damaged or overheated during the alleged incident. So, considering all the points discussed in this video and the incessant comparison to the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that my personal conclusion for this case aligns with my conclusion for that case. As I stated in that video, my conclusion was an emphatic I don't know, and that sums up my thoughts on this case pretty well. Like many paranormal subjects, the Flatwoods monster case lacks sufficient enough evidence to definitively prove or disprove the claims made by the witnesses. But I want to reiterate that it is worth noting that both skeptics and believers are confident that this encounter was not a hoax. Regardless of whether the 7 witnesses saw an alien or an eerie owl, it is clear that they witnessed something that deeply affected them and caused physical ailments. As for me, I'm starting to accept more and more of the statement of I don't know when it comes to my research, my conclusions, and my final thoughts. Of course, it's frustrating, but the truth of what happened on that warm night of September 12th, 1952, lies with those 7 witnesses, of whom, sadly, most have passed on. Edward May, who we discussed earlier, was the last surviving witness of the encounter, and all the other witnesses had stepped away from the publicity of the case many years ago due to constant harassment by both believers and skeptics, which of course is unfortunately common in the paranormal field. With that, though, we've pretty much covered everything related to this strange case of UFO history in the United States. So now I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into my personal thoughts and feelings about this case. So when I started my research, it soon became apparent how little I truly knew about this case. Now, when it comes to the state of West Virginia in the context of the paranormal, most people immediately think of the Mothman, and that's always what I pictured as my state's paranormal mascot. For context, I've lived in West Virginia since I was 8 years old, and given my already passionate belief and interest in the paranormal, I was quick to study the Mothman case. Of course, that interest and passion would lead to my first ever video on the channel, which was my Mothman deep dive a little over a year ago. It took me many years after my family and I arrived to the state to learn about the Flatwoods monster. Shockingly, despite the supposed encounter featuring both a crashed UFO and a 10-foot tall mechanical alien, this case never appealed to me as much as other cases, and I'm not really sure why. If I had to guess, and my best guess for my thoughts would be that the Mothman tends to hog the paranormal spotlight for the state of West Virginia. But when you look at these cases side by side, it's easy to see why this may be. Contrary to the one night encounter of the Flatwoods monster, although there is the next night encounter with the half reptilian, and there was one encounter with another tall creature, but I can't say confidently it was the Flatwoods monster. It was about a week before that September 12th encounter. Someone just described seeing a tall creature, like a 10-foot tall creature, but like nothing beyond like it was just a tall creature. Mostly everyone knows the Flatwoods monster as this one night event, whereas the Mothman had been sighted for over a year and concluded with the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which claimed the lives of 46 individuals. Additionally, the Mothman and Mothman like creatures are still reportedly seen to this day, but when it comes to the Flatwoods monster, it hasn't been seen since those original encounters. However, with all that said, I want to express that after dedicating myself to researching this case, I have developed a deeper respect for it and thoroughly enjoyed the process. As is typical in paranormal studies, sources often vary in their information, ranging from minor differences to major disparities. What I have just presented to you is my best effort to navigate those variations, dispel the fabrications and exaggerations, and piece together what I believe to be the true story, or at least the closest approximation to it. Unfortunately, it seems that I, along with many others, have a preference for the Mothman. However, that doesn't mean the Flatwoods monster case should be overlooked and ignored. While it may not have the same abundance in evidence and eyewitnesses as the Mothman, the Flatwoods monster is still a compelling piece of paranormal history that deserves to be studied and appreciated. But for now, it seems that Braxy will have to settle for being West Virginia's second favorite cryptid. With that, we've reached the end of my outline, so I'm going to kind of just speak freely here about some things I just want to mention. If you were here just for the Flatwoods monster, that part's over. I'm just going to kind of get personal and talk about some things that I want to talk about. Um, if you do decide to click off here, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed it. But yeah, let's talk about a couple things. So, as I mentioned earlier, there is the Bigfoot Festival in Sutton, West Virginia. Now, I'm making this video here because I am going to that event on June 25th, I think is what day I said there. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. If I did, I'll throw it up here, what the correct date is and all that. But yes, if you are in and around Sutton and you have the time to go out to do this event, I highly, highly recommend it. Like I said, I went there last year and I couldn't believe the turnout that was there. Sutton is a really, really small town. It is a real sleepy town. But just to see the streets of this little town just filled to the brim with people selling, excuse me, with people selling uh, cryptid, like paraphernalia, I guess would be the word there. Just a little small town having a giant festival dedicated to. It's really dedicated to one cryptid, but since the Flatwoods monster is right there and it is involved within the celebration, it's a two cryptid festival pretty much, and I really cannot recommend it enough. And in fact, once again, this is not an ad. I just absolutely love this event. Um, I'm going to put the link down in the description below of the Facebook event. Um, I highly, highly, I cannot like recommend this enough. If you love little arts and crafts things, if you love the paranormal, cryptozoology, anything like that, or just love community events like this, I cannot recommend this one enough. I will put it down in the description. Not paid, not ad, nothing. Just love this event. Um, Second thing I want to talk about is thank you all so much for the support on the previous videos. I put out a little 6-7 minute long video update. I know it didn't get many views, so I just want to kind of talk about what I talked about in that video. I just wanted to say thank you all so much for the last couple videos. The Jersey Devil video was me coming back, restarting this stuff, and I'm so proud of that video. It is probably my favorite video to date. Um, and you all killed that video. You all got it over 200 views within like 3 days. You all passed my Mothman video within like 3 days. You all are absolutely insane. And then I upload the Kelly Hopkinsville video, and you all blow that one up to 1,000 views. And when I say blow up or destroy, I mean these all in the most positive way possible. You all went absolutely crazy on that video. It was my first video to pass 1,000 views. Um, I've doubled my subscribers here. More comments than I'd ever seen on a video, more likes than I'd ever seen on a video. It just makes me so happy that you all enjoyed that video. Um, yeah, that's really it that I got to say about those videos. This is not, by the way, if you watched my Jersey Devil video, no, the Kelly Hopkinsville video, I swear, I'm gonna try not to mention it anymore. But the Kelly Hopkinsville video, I talked that there was gonna be a bigger video in between a smaller video that has to do with one pertaining to the end of the month. But this is the video that was supposed to come out at the end of this month, and it probably will come out close to the end of the month. That bigger video that was supposed to be in between that one and this one was going to be too big for me to get out by the end of this month. And the reason is that I wanted to get this video out before I went to the Bigfoot Festival because I was going to be talking about the Flatwoods monster. So yeah, I had to kind of switch my schedule around. So now that big video is one I'm going to try to work on after this one. Um, so yeah, I had to rearrange those around a little bit. So that basically covers like kind of what I have coming next. I have 2, 3, 4 possible things that I'm looking to work on after this one. I just want to say that I'm probably with this video, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from cryptids. With doing the Jersey Devil, the Hopkinsville Goblins, and now the Flatwoods Monster. That's 3 pretty decently sized cryptids in a row. So I kind of want to take a little bit of a break from cryptids and kind of get into more like just kind of paranormal, creepy stuff, and also kind of get into history stuff a little bit, maybe a little bit of conspiracy theory things. But yeah, I'm gonna kind of take a break from cryptids for a little bit. They might be mentioned here or there in the subtext of other outlines and things. But when it comes to just like strictly cryptid videos, yeah, I think this is going to be the last one for a little bit. I will eventually come back to them. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to talk about. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. I'm sure this one's a little shorter. I'm sorry if I notice sometimes when I'm doing these videos I talk a little fast. I'm a little sorry for that. And thank you all so much for sticking with me through my technical difficulties I've been having. I know there was some comments about how quiet I was in the last video. I've been trying to kind of readjust everything. So like when I'm editing and stuff, I think I made my voice too quiet the past couple of videos. So I'm hopefully got that fixed. There should be no more black bars at the top and bottom of the video now, hopefully. I realized my recording software was not recording in the right aspect ratio, so it was just all wrong. But hopefully that should be fixed now. Last thing I really want to say is, well, one of the last things I want to say. I got 2 more things to say. I'm going to put my Twitter and my Instagram down in the description. If you all want to go follow those, I really suggest you go follow them. It's the best way to keep up with what I'm doing when I'm not making videos. I don't use them super often, mostly just talk about like works in progress, stuff like that. I've also been trying to get better about like using the community tab on my channel here to keep you all updated with what's coming up. So yeah, just go follow those socials, please, if you want to. Don't expect a ton from me, but if you want them, they're there. I'll put them there. But for that, the last thing I want to ask you all to do is please like, please comment, please subscribe if you enjoyed. It'll really help me out. It lets me all know you enjoy it. Clearly, you all seem to be enjoying it, and I couldn't be any happier. I'm so glad that you all like these videos and what I'm doing here. But you all, by doing that, by liking, by commenting, and subscribing, you are helping me even more. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I hope to see you all again soon.